You may be seated. So nice to be on the bima with you, Cantor. Before you leave with you, but that's okay. That's okay. Well, thank you. It is nice to sing with you on the bima and to lead services with you on the bima as well. It's wonderful, yes, and to have our musicians here, Mark and Gina, absolutely a blessing as well. To have live music. It was wonderful last year pre-recorded, but it's great to be here in person and for us to be gathering together. There was a meme that made the rounds on the world of rabbinic Instagram, where rabbis post little rabbi jokes to each other. And it said something along the lines of, I think this year for Rosh Hashanah, rabbis should be able to just stand up and say, wow, it's really been a crazy year. I don't know what to make of it, but l'chaim. And that would be all. That could be our sermons this year. It was tempting, but I decided to write something out instead. One Erev Rosh Hashanah, Abraham, Jonah, and Job walked into a bar. Jonah spoke first. Oi, what a year I've had. Last year on Yom Kippur, God sent me to Nineveh. I tried to sail away. There was a big storm. I was afraid. The sailors were afraid. They threw me into the sea, and I was caught and eaten by a fish that was this big. Abraham listened patiently and then shared, "You think that's bad? Let me tell you. Last year on Rosh Hashanah, God told me to sacrifice my son Isaac. Just as I was about to slice, God stopped me and said that it was all a test." Job sat quietly before starting. "That's nothing. Oi, what a year. I was the wealthiest man in the East, with 10 wonderful children. In an instant, everything I owned was taken or destroyed. My house collapsed, killing all my family, and the next thing I knew, I was covered in boils. God happened to be tending the bar that night, having given everyone else the night off so they could celebrate Rosh Hashanah with their families. And after listening to each escalating story of woe, God said, "Wow, that sounds like a tough year. How about a round of coronavirus on the house? Or maybe I could pour you something tall and strong like a hurricane." Little Jimmy Buffett reference there. In our sacred scriptures, the Hebrew word yirah described the feelings of Abraham, Jonah, and Job towards God. Fear. Yirah is a central theme of our worship during the High Holy Days. Our tradition refers to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur collectively as Yamim Noraim, days of fear. The classical understanding reflected in our prayers is that Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. We stand in judgment before God. The righteous will be inscribed in the book of life for a good year. As we will read throughout the High Holy Days, in the Unatana Tokef prayer, the liturgical climax of each of our services, Barosh Hashanah Yikatevun Uvyom Tzom Kippur Yechatemun. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed, who will live and who will die. The words, the music, fill us with yirah, fear of heaven. Today there are many sources of fear in our lives. COVID and climate change, the economy and systemic racial injustice, divisive rhetoric in partisan politics, the erosion of reproductive choice. I could go on. Yirah, our fear of heaven, may not be on the top of our minds this year. There's a disconnect between our understanding of the world and the fear of heaven that is described in our sacred scriptures. This disconnect is reinforced in rabbinic commentary and emphasized in our prayers during the High Holy Days. I struggle with this idea, the fear of heaven. And I share the sentiments expressed by my teacher, Rabbi David Ellenson, who observed that the notion of a God who sits in judgment of each individual and decrees our fate for the coming year is at best improbable and perhaps even offensive and alienating. Modern Orthodox leader and thinker Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg identified 3 stages to the covenant between God and the Jewish people during a recent interview published on reformjudaism.org. In the first biblical stage, God was very present, though in a controlling, domineering, and sometimes frightening way. In the second, rabbinic stage of Judaism, people have more freedom. They have the authority and the responsibility to carry out the covenant, and God is present in the human analysis, the interpretations, the commentary that rabbis offer in Midrash, Mishnah, and Talmud. And in the third, the modern stage of Judaism, we are fully responsible to act covenantally, to carry out tikkun olam, the repair of our world. God remains very close, encouraging and sustaining us. God operates through human agents, and it is up to us to continue the work of God. God does not intervene magically from above. Our fear, our yirah, may not move God in the way of Abraham, Jonah, and Job. But still, at this stage in our covenant, it is up to us to honor the covenant of the past through our actions. In describing these stages of the covenant, Rabbi Greenberg attempts to reconcile or respond theologically to God's presence or silence amidst destruction in the world, and specifically in response to the destruction of the Shoah, the Holocaust. Viktor Frankl, a prominent psychotherapist and Holocaust survivor, whose writings have helped me to put our current fears into perspective, offers a similar message, emphasizing our agency in response to our fear. After surviving multiple concentration, labor, and death camps, Viktor Frankl wrote an autobiographical account of his experiences, Man's Search for Meaning, detailing his responses to the psychological reactions that were common to camp life. When starving prisoners were not closely watched, they would immediately start discussing food, exchanging recipes, planning the menu for a reunion after liberation. On a forced, frigid march, Frankl began to imagine a conversation with his wife, not knowing if she was alive. He did not need to know. The contemplation of her image and the mental conversation with her would have been just as vivid and satisfying. He wrote, "I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved." Viktor Frankl attributed survival in part to his ability to overcome his fear and to focus on something that gave his life meaning and purpose. He wrote, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the ones who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Our experiences and our fears cannot be compared to the Shalom. We are able to learn from our past and our tradition that focusing on what gives us meaning and purpose, on our responsibility to act covenantally and engage in tikkun olam as agents of God. Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote that the root of religion is what to do with the feeling for the mystery of living, what to do with awe, wonder, or fear. Judaism offers a structure for us to process our feelings, our awe and our fear, especially when we are surrounded by chaos and uncertainty. We are empowered and able to choose our attitude, our response to what we fear. On Yom Kippur morning, we will read that our ancestors stood together before God on the precipice of the promised land. God spoke to them and to us. If we follow God, we will be blessed. If we depart from the covenant, curses and suffering await. This day I call heaven and earth to witness regarding you. Choose life so that you and your children may live. Throughout the High Holy Days, we are reminded of this message to choose life. That while we may be filled with fear as we stand in judgment before God, wondering who will live and who will die, uteshuva, utefila, utsedaka, ma'avirin et haroa gzera, that repentance and returning, prayer and righteous acts of tzedakah will change God's judgments. Another name for Rosh Hashanah in our tradition is Yom Harat Olam, the day of the world's birth. And as we celebrate the world, whether or not we believe in the creation narrative of Torah, we are fearful of the growing impacts of climate change. The realistic possibility that if we do not act, our grandchildren may witness the end of humanity. If God did not intervene at Auschwitz, we cannot wait for divine intervention now. But as Frankel and Greenberg emphasized, we are endowed with the skills and the tools to survive, to intervene, to speak up, to act. Like Abraham, Jonah, and Job, who each challenged God at one point, we are able to challenge our fears, to choose our path forward. Our fate is in our hands. Adonai, our God, and God who made a covenant with generations past, as we are filled with yirah, fear, reverence, and awe. May we continue to feel your presence in the year to come. May it be a year filled with sweetness, health, and joy. May we find strength as we choose life in response to fear, as we honor our covenant by engaging in tikkun olam, the repair of our world. Amen. We continue now with the words of Elena L'Shabeach on page 82 in our prayer books. I invite you to please rise in body or in spirit.